blue, and it's extremely gendered. And it's like how you introduce your child to the idea of gender binary fashion is through pink and blue.
I'm guilty of it myself. I have boy and girl twins. I had boy and girl twins. How do we say this? It turns out that I just have twins that are non-gendered. One of my twins identifies as non-binary.
Right.
But when they were young, like I dressed them in pink and blue. Like they, you know, matching clothes, but in pink and blue, you know? That's
well, how, like, I feel like it makes more sense in a twin situation than in most situations because you have to tell them apart from an extremely young age, and that's an easy way to do it. So that makes sense to me.
They had different parts, so I mean, it's not like it was that hard to tell them.
That's only when you take all their clothes off. they could totally switch in the bassinet or whatever people put babies in. I don't know. If they were wearing the same thing, you might not know.
Yeah, and they look different, and one of them had a birthmark on their face, so it's not like I needed to do that. And thinking back to it, I do have like a lot of guilt around like having them so gendered. Like, you know, I would always put one in a dress and the other in pants, and like how miserable that made you know, my kiddo.
Well, but the fact that your kiddo came out as non-binary and that you are honoring that as a parent, I think, I mean, that's the best that you can do. That's a very wonderful
right
thing.
now. But after me and you solve this, then everybody's going to realize that we don't need to gender children straight out of the womb, and we could just let them decide that on their own as they grow up and like really can pick, you know, who they want to be.
Yeah. Let them express themselves, sometimes through fashion.
Right.
But the thing that I learned, which I think I had a vague idea of before, is that like the pink and blue thing is very recent. Like up until, I think it was like around 100 years ago, pink and blue were actually often switched so that pink was for boys and blue was for girls, because blue was considered to be like a more passive, like feminine, cool and calm color, and pink was closer to red, which is more like active and angry.
There's one specific color of pink called jailhouse pink where they paint like jails or jail cells this color, and the people actually get into less fights. So you think that it's more of an aggressive color, but when it comes down to it, it actually has more of a calming sensation on people. And from what I understand, they can't even really explain why this is. I don't know who they are and why they need to, but
prison color theorists, they're out there. Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, basically, like the reading that I was doing led me to believe that it's basically been in like the last 50 years or so that we have really like gotten into boys wear blue, girls wear pink territory, and it's really like calcified in our culture. And primarily the idea is that if you separate a group of people into more than one category, then you can sell more things, because people on either side of that divide will have to buy the thing that identifies them as whichever side they identify with. So
are you talking about the beauty tax?
No, I wasn't, but we can.
Women pay more than men for a wide range of everyday items, and that includes fashion. In fact, women actually pay more for like dry cleaning.
Really?
For like a men's shirt versus a women's shirt is going to be more when it comes to pricing. And then like for haircuts, women's hair is going to be more than men's hair. And when you think about it, like men make less than women. Women of color make less than white women. And so when you think about the fact that a haircut for a white woman costs less than a haircut for a woman of color, then
it's costing more to be making less money.
Like exactly.
What's the inverse? Wow. Inverse proportions.
You did it.
I did it.
Yes, look at you.
No, and like when you get into the fact that, at least in my experience, it would be pretty easy for many professional men to wear pretty much the same thing every day, 5 days a week to work. Like, people might notice, maybe somebody will say
Cargo
something.
shorts.
And socks with flip-flops, depending on your industry, obviously. Like, but a guy could pretty much wear like khakis and a plaid shirt to work every day. Maybe it's a different shirt, maybe it's not. People really wouldn't notice that much. But if a woman wore the same outfit to work every day, it would be
Mm-hmm.
commented upon. She would be shat on for it, because women are expected to prize their appearance more than men are. They're expected to want more clothing and to therefore have more clothing changes. And they're expected to pay a premium for all of that, because if you have shitty clothes, people will also notice that and call it out.
Not only that, but like work requirements often have more standards for women to meet than men.
Yeah.
You have to have a certain hairstyle, or
You
you can't have
certainly
natural
cannot,
hair.
and you cannot have spaghetti straps. Dear Lord, you
Yeah,
cannot have them.
there are definitely like work standards of fashion that are much more expensive and more expected of women than men.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one reason that I was never good at the working world generally, because I just didn't like I did not save up money to
You're
get nice
using it in the
clothing.
past tense. Are you just done with the working world now?
I
Are you
mean,
like retired? Like,
I still work, but at home for myself in my pajamas. Nobody sees me, so I can wear whatever I want. And I don't go clothing shopping anymore. Like, when I
I buy
do, it's almost always
tops.
secondhand.
I buy tops because I'm on Zoom all the time.
Right.
But like I don't like I live in sweatpants now. In fact, I wore jeans the other day with underwear. And I was like, this is so uncomfortable. Like both the
Right?
underwear and the jeans were just like horrible.
Like, why do
Why
people
did
do
I ever
this?
wear this?
Yeah, for real. I have pretty much given up on underwear. It's just not part of my routine anymore. I was just going to say nobody needs to know, but now everybody who's listening to this knows.
Oh,
So,
like you didn't post about it on Twitter like 3 months ago.
I mean, nobody follows me on Twitter, so it's a safe
Yes.
place. Um, but oh, actually, speaking of like pants, I wish that I had
Hmm.
done more research on undergarments, because I find that stuff really interesting. Like, nobody really talks about all of that, and I want to know what people did with their biz like long ago.
Well,
But
we can do a whole episode. Maybe we can have a return guest on here. Um,
oh,
and we could talk about undergarments throughout history.
yeah, oh, that would be fun.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm gonna put that down on my list. Undergarments. So I was thinking about the fact that, like, our modern fashion, and the gender binary imposed by modern fashion standards is like, it's very strict, much more so for men. Like, a man, generally speaking, wearing a skirt is going to get a lot more shit than a woman wearing pants. You know, it doesn't get applied in the same way to people on the opposite ends of the gender spectrum. Um, but I was thinking about how
Right.
that is a relatively recent occurrence in Western fashion, and how, like, say the 1700s, women were wearing giant skirts, true, but men were not wearing pants and suits. Men were wearing powdered wigs and makeup, and high
Hmm.
heels were specifically a men's item in Europe in the 17 and early 1800s, I believe.
Yeah,
Um,
I wore my George Washington look the other day, which is like my hair fixed exactly like a George Washington wig and the same makeup and some high heels and a blouse. And people kept saying how fabulous I looked, and I was like, "Thanks.
right.
I'm dressed in exactly what George Washington wore
Yeah. And
for
then
the
when you would
signing
like,
of the Declaration of the Independence."
and like when you would look into like the royal courts in like France, like the colors and the shininess and like the embroidery, like the stuff that those men wore would be considered patently feminine to us now in America.
Today, yeah.
Yeah. And like how weird it is that that wasn't really that long ago, historically speaking, and yet things have changed so drastically. So I started looking into the Dandyism movement,
Yeah.
which started in the late 18th century, by this group of men called the Macaroni Club. This is
Ooh.
this group of English dudes who went to Italy for a while and got all of these ideas about fashion and art and
Wait,
how to present
why
oneself.
did they call themselves the Macaroni Club? Was it because
Because
I don't know,
macaroni
they're
was a
straight
term,
until
I
they're
believe.
straight until they get hot? I don't
They go limp when they get hot. I don't know if
I
that
don't
works.
I'm not
My I haven't looked that deeply into it, but my memory tells me that at some point I learned that macaroni, I mean, it's an Italian word that means like a form of pasta, but that this group of men glommed onto that as like their word that they were going to take from their time in Italy and bring it back to England and make it fashionable and popular. So
Oh, okay, so they
when
were gonna call
somebody,
on this the word macaroni. I get it.
yeah, it was like, saying, I don't know what the kids say now. So if you say that something is cool, like back then, it would have been called macaroni, which is actually a lyric in the song Yankee Doodle, which is making
Oh,
fun of like,
oh,
they're like basically the song was making fun of English people who thought that Yankees were like uncultured swine. So the stuck a
okay.
feather in his cap and called it macaroni is him saying, like, I all I have is this stupid feather. I'm gonna put it in my cap and now I'm fashionable.
That is nuts. Okay, here's the thing. Hats are like a big thing that Native Americans are reclaiming from like
Mm.
parts of history where they had traded different things for hats as a standard of like class and service and war and
Oh
things like that.
yeah.
And so I wear a hat when I go out onto the Senate floor as a callback to that with a feather in it, which
Mm-hmm.
I called macaroni to be funny.
You were doing it right.
I know. I was totally okay.
That's wild. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read this quote that I got from the Fashion Encyclopedia online about the dandies. So,
Okay.
Dandyism had its roots in the Macaroni Club formed in London, England in the 1760s by a group of rich young Englishmen who had just returned from a tour of Italy. The Macaronis championed elaborate and exaggerated styles of dress. They loaded themselves down with layer after layer of lace ruffles and gold embroidery and wore knee buckles, striped stockings, and shoes with bright red heels. Some of them sported wigs that were at least a foot high, topped by a tricorn or
Ooh.
three-cornered hat. In fact, the lyric from the famous American patriotic song Yankee Doodle, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni, refers to these early dandy fashions.
Hmm.
So the interesting thing is that the dandyism as a movement, it became like, a fashion statement, but then it became more of a political movement over time because this is right around when first the American Revolution and then the French Revolution happened, and there was starting to be more of a leveling effect um, between the nobility and the not nobility, and people who identified as dandies started to see this elaborate style of dress as a way of rebelling against the encroachment of normal people into nobility, like the noble class.
Hmm.
Um,
New
and
money.
yeah, exactly. So, like, the people with old money were like, oh, well, we're going to dress so fancy that,
Mm-hmm.
they can't catch up with us. But as they did start to catch up, it actually became more of a movement amongst the people for like people who were not nobility but were richer than nobility. They started trying to outdress the nobility, and it therefore became
Oh.
more of like a rebellion thing,
Oh.
right? I was like,
Oh.
who knew this is all going on? And then this guy named George Beau Brummel, who is known by Beau, came onto the scene in England. He was the son of a butler, so he was like nobody, absolutely nobody. But he had enough money that he was college educated at Oxford, and he entered like London society and took all of his money and poured it into fashion. And also, like, he became this figure in London society who somehow had more sway over what everybody else wore